money, yeah, the money that they spent. Take another look and take some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, 'cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. An acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, it's time for hemp. Yeah.
Thank you for taking time for hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. You are listening to the live broadcast of Time for Hemp all around the world on AmericanFreedomRadio.com and on AM/FM stations all across America. I want to give a big shout-out to all of my friends up in Canada and say thank you to KDK Distributors for being nice enough to give us a grant to keep us loud, proud, and strong. And I also want to send my love to all the hardworking activists in Argentina who tune in. Hello to Mike Bafari. And, of course, everybody listening all around the world. Today is Healthy Mondays. We think it's a great way to kick off the week is to focus on our own personal health and the things that we can do to make us stronger so that we can love those around us more and can be here longer to love them. And our joint host on the program every Monday is also dedicated to making certain that people who need medical marijuana can have access to their medications. I'm talking about Mary Lynn Mathery and Al Burns. Thank you for taking time for hemp.
Thanks for having us again. Happy Healthy Monday.
Thank you. And our joint guest today, for those who are tuning in for the first time, anytime the word joint happens to be mentioned, 1.5 million people all around the world hit their vaporizers, their pipes, and, of course, their joints. So in our joint interview today, our joint guest is Dr. Donald Abrams. Dr. Abrams, thank you for taking time for hemp.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Why don't you let our audience know a little bit more about you?
Okay, so I'm Donald Abrams, and I'm a professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. I'm chief of hematology oncology, that's the blood and cancer service at San Francisco General Hospital. And at the beginning of my training to become a cancer specialist 32 years ago, suddenly AIDS came out of the blue and we didn't know what it was or what to do about it. So I became at that time, if you will, a champion of alternative therapies, even when there were actually no conventional therapies. And when conventional therapies came, I didn't think they were very good. So I wrote all the chapters in all the AIDS textbooks about complementary and alternative medicines in HIV/AIDS. And then in 1992, I got a letter from Rick Doblin, the president of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, suggesting that a clinical trial showing the benefits of cannabis in patients with the AIDS wasting syndrome should come from Mary Raspin's institution. Mary was Brownie Mary, who was a volunteer in our AIDS clinic, used to wheel our patients to X-ray and drop off their prescriptions, and also she would bake them brownies. And she had just been arrested in Sonoma for making brownies for AIDS patients. And I decided I would pick up this gauntlet and worked with Rick Doblin and tried to petition the government to allow me to study inhaled cannabis in patients with the wasting syndrome. Well, as you can imagine, it was a long story and difficult and didn't work out so quickly. But ultimately, in 1997, I did do a clinical trial of inhaled cannabis versus dronabinol, or delta-9 THC versus dronabinol placebo, in patients with AIDS on protease inhibitors. Unfortunately, I live in California, so the state of California was able to establish a Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at the University of California, which could actually fund studies to demonstrate the medicinal benefits of cannabis. So we were able to do a number of studies with that funding. One demonstrated that smoked cannabis was useful in patients with painful nerve damage from HIV. And another study we did there showed that vaporization was the equivalent of smoking in healthy volunteers. And the final study that I just got published last month was a study we did in patients with chronic pain who were on fixed doses of sustained-release morphine or oxycodone, where we brought them into our research center and we exposed them to vaporized cannabis over 4 days and measured the level of the opiates in their bloodstream to see if there was any interaction between the cannabis and the opioids. And we found no change in the level of the opioids in the bloodstream, but patients got increased relief of pain when they added the cannabinoids to the opioids. So that's what I do. Those are my research trials. But again, as a cancer doctor, every day I see patients for whom I recommend cannabis, and I can do so because I live in California, and we have that ability for the last 16 years.
Well, your work is absolutely amazing. I've got to admit, the first time I heard about AIDS, I was living in the Midwest, and I had no clue as to what they were or what it was. And then I went into the military and served over in Germany for 3 years, where there were no reported cases of AIDS. And by the time I returned from the military back into the United States, the epidemic was full-blown. And by that time, they were fully aware of what the problems were and how the disease was contracted and passed. And they were desperately looking for a resolve to the horrible, horrible disease. Now, there are people around the world, before I let Mary Lynn and Al take over the conversation, there are people around the world and here in America who think that they have found maybe even the cure. Have you heard anything along those lines? Is that still a myth?
A cure for AIDS? Yeah,
no, that there's a cure. Is that a myth, or are we getting close to getting a cure for AIDS?
Well, I mean, currently HIV is a chronic manageable disease, so people who have the infection can take antiretroviral drugs and can live much longer than they did certainly at the beginning of the epidemic in the 1980s. There are complications of taking the drugs that also over time can become life-threatening, but certainly the drugs have totally changed the face of the disease. I don't know if it's possible to cure retroviral infection personally. Actually, I don't do AIDS anymore. I stopped working in AIDS 6 years ago after I finished my fellowship in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona, program in integrative medicine, Andrew Wiles program. So after I finished my fellowship, I decided really AIDS was so different from when I started that my job now was to do integrative oncology, working with people living with and beyond cancer diagnoses and helping them to integrate nutrition, physical activity, supplements, Chinese medicine, mind, body, spirituality into their conventional cancer care.
Awesome.
So I don't do any more AIDS, but I don't think it's cured yet.
Awesome.
Neither is cancer, by the way.
Mary Lynn, Al?
Doctor, you kind of blew by this, but you mentioned to the listening audience that because you live in California, you could get some research done that was serious and paid for. Could you explain a little bit some of the difficulties you've had over the past, decade or more?
Well, 20 years now. Yeah. Well, the real problem was right at the very beginning when I was young and naive, and I asked, the first study that I tried to design, we were going to get cannabis donated from a Dutch grower. And, I need to, if you're working with cannabis, which is a so-called Schedule I substance, meaning it has a high potential for abuse and no known medical use, you need a special license. And when I applied to get the license to use this cannabis coming from Holland, they said, no, we can't do that until you send us a letter from the Dutch exporter saying that it's okay for them to export it. And the Dutch exporter said, no, they can't send me the letter until the U.S. government sends a letter saying it's okay to import it. So clearly that was my first, if you will, catch-22 situation that I was put in. And ultimately I was advised to seek a domestic source. And I didn't know exactly what that was, but people said, well, you're never going to be able to import cannabis for clinical trials across international borders. So the only legal source of cannabis for clinical trials in the United States is NIDA, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. It's the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So I wrote a letter at that time to Alan Leshner, who was the head of NIDA, asking if I could have 5.7 kilos of cannabis to do a clinical trial in patients with HIV and wasting. It took about a year, but ultimately he responded and said no, and basically said my study was unscientific. So then we worked on making a study that was more scientific, and he said that if we received favorable peer review, he would reconsider giving us cannabis for our clinical trial. Well, that means submit it actually as a grant to the NIH, which we did in 1996. And the grant did not even get scored. Usually when you submit a grant, 50% used to get a score, and the other 50% were considered so outrageous that they didn't score them. So we didn't get a score, and the reviewers said, we don't know why they would consider studying such a toxic substance, which was a little bit of a shock. But anyway, we weren't going to let that stop, and so I actually went off to meet with Alan Leshner, and I told him, gee, what can I do here? And he said, the problem is that you're asking for marijuana to show that it has a medicinal benefit. And NIDA is the National Institute on Drug Abuse, he told me, not for drug abuse. He said that they have a congressional mandate to only study substances of abuse as substances of abuse and not as therapeutic agents. So as long as I was going to continue to request to receive marijuana to study to show it has a medicinal benefit, I was going to run into a brick wall. So ultimately what I did was, in 1996, effective AIDS medications became available, the protease inhibitors, and they are sensitively metabolized in the liver by the same system that metabolizes other substances, including recreational drugs. And there had been a case report of somebody dying from an overdose of ecstasy who was taking one of these AIDS drugs. So we wrote a protocol to look at the safety of inhaled cannabis in patients on protease inhibitors. And that's the study that we got funded because we weren't looking to see if it was effective. So that was one obstacle. But when the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research was developed or established at the University of California in 1999, then it became a lot easier because being the only legal source of cannabis in the country, NIDA made a provision to be able to supply cannabis for research to investigators who were funded to do their research by the California Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research. And so we received NIDA cannabis, but the studies were paid for by the University of California Center. And so NIDA could get around that. And then the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research also streamlined some of the application process because when I applied to do a clinical trial of inhaled cannabis in patients with HIV at the University of California, San Francisco, in our General Clinical Research Center at San Francisco General Hospital, I required 8 different bodies to approve it. And each one, when they looked at the study, wanted to make a change here or a change there, so it became quite a daunting task.
Well, thank you, Doctor, for that. I just wanted the folks out there to understand when they hear the government say, well, we don't have a lot of U.S. research on the therapeutic uses of cannabis, this is why, because our own government has kept that at a minimum at best. Is there a future for you in research? Where is research going now with cannabis? Is it going to be ingested in the U.S.? Is it something we're going to ingest? Is it something we're going to inhale? Do you see an ultimate application?
Well, it's a very good question, Al. The government right now has a very limited budget for studying anything really at the NIH. I mean, nobody's going to say that they're poor, but a friend of mine who's in media said, oh, yeah, the government doesn't have money to study cancer and Alzheimer's. You think they're going to give you money to study marijuana? Because, what I'd like to do is a study now looking at cannabinoids and opioids with pain as the primary endpoint. My first study that I described that just got published was really just a pharmacokinetic interaction study to measure the levels of opiates and see if there was any change when people inhaled the cannabis. It wasn't really large enough to make a definitive statement about the fact that cannabinoids may boost the analgesic potential of opioids. But that would be the next study I want to do. And, can I? I don't know. I have not yet written that grant. I think, as you know, that the world is full of people trying to develop pharmaceuticals that are based on cannabis or pharmaceuticals that somehow interact with the body's cannabinoid receptors to see if they could affect the same changes that inhaling cannabis produces without having all the baggage associated with inhaled cannabis. And as you know, we already have Delta-9 THC available as a drug in at least 2 different forms in the United States. But it's not, it's only one of 400 compounds that are present in the plant. And as you well know, and I'm sure most of the listeners do, there's a huge interest now in other cannabinoids that are present in the plant, particularly the one called cannabidiol, or CBD. CBD.
Well, I have to jump in here because there's a huge interest in paying our bills and making our budget. So we're going to take a commercial break here, and then we're going to listen to a song about how fantastic marijuana is, and then we'll be coming back to Healthy Mondays here at Time for Hemp.
Indigrow, your source for affordable induction grow lighting, invented in 1891 by Nikola Tesla and used commercially for over 16 years. Induction technology delivers an unequaled 100,000 hours of electronic sunlight, which equals to 11 years of life even when run 24/7, making induction lighting virtually maintenance-free. Tesla's invention provides sunlight in a box for your victory garden. By using less mercury, these fixtures are energy efficient and environmentally friendly. Using Indigrow induction lights also prevents plant diseases, because the plant gets a constant source of light and ends up healthier than plants grown outside. Indigrow grow lights come with a 10-year warranty and are proudly made in San Diego, California. Nikola Tesla's induction lighting is the cost-effective addition to your victory garden. To learn more or order now, go to inda-grow.com. That's INDA-GRO.com. Or call 877-452-2244. Indigrow, your sunlight in a box.
Yo, what's up? Check this out.
The voice of the revolution. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
I call this my coming out of the closet song. I'm not at all ashamed to say that I'm growing marijuana in my yard. Growing marijuana in my yard. Got little pots of pies spread out all over the lot, 'cause I'm growing marijuana in my yard. Well, I got the seed from Mexico, stuck it in some dirt and let it grow. Put it in my garden with my peppers and my peas, and I get all the smoke I need for free. 'Cause I'm growing marijuana in my yard. Growing marijuana in my yard. We keep it where no one can see, so let's keep this between you and me. I'm growing marijuana in my yard. I'm growing marijuana in my yard. But I can't tell my boss or I'll get fired. I don't grow much, just what I use. I work all day, and when I'm through, I smoke some marijuana from my yard. Yeah. He wants to talk to me. He says, how you gonna smoke up all that weed? He says, money's what you're in it for. Don't you know we're in a war? Now I'm gonna haul your ass downtown with me. I said, hey man, what is it to you? How do I infringe on what you do? Well, I beg your pardon if you're offended by my garden, but I just can't grow Prozac in my yard. So I grow my own medicine in my yard. I give some to my neighbor for his heart. Share it with my grandma, who keeps it from her son, 'cause we all know that stuff's against the law. Well, now there's nothing growing in my yard, 'cause the cops took all my land, both my cars. Now I have to buy my pot from a teenager in the parking lot who's growing marijuana in his yard. Oh, anyone can grow it in their yard.
yard, and I loved it. And it looked beautiful, and I've got to say, I don't understand it. It is so unique to any other plant I have ever laid eyes on. It's kind of like it has its own aura, its own little spirit, its own little energy force around it, unlike tomatoes and petunias and roses and trees and shrubs. You can almost sense walking by a marijuana plant, and when you take good care of them and love them and water them every day when you go out in the sun, their little branches are like little arms and hands waving at you saying, I love you, and I love you too, Mary Jane. And if you love Mary Jane, you can find a lot of organizations in your neck of the woods to help spread the truth about the importance of ending prohibition, about the importance of utilizing marijuana for medicinal benefits, and the importance of reintroduction of hemp into the industrial community. Every Monday, it is Healthy Mondays, and we are focused on a hardworking group of people who are doing what they can for patients who are out of time, which Mary Lynn and Al, before we move forward with our amazing interview with Dr. Donald, why don't you let people know a little bit about patients out of time and about the accredited program, if they are in the field of medicine, they can locate and utilize there on the site.
Well, thanks. Yeah, Patients Out of Time is a national nonprofit organization, educational charity, founded in 1995, and ever since 2000, we've had a biennial. Every 2 years, we offer an accredited conference series on cannabis therapeutics, and we feature an international faculty. And let me tell you, ever since 2000 being the first one, 2002, from the second on to our upcoming conference in April 2012 of this year, we've had Donald Abrams as one of the speakers, presenting some of his research. He always gets great reviews, so we always love having him. And since 2006, when we had our conference in Santa Barbara, California, Dr. Abrams has helped us with that accreditation. So we've had these conferences being accredited by the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine to provide continuing medical education credits for physicians attending this wonderful conference. And upcoming will be the 7th National Clinical Conference on Cannabis Therapeutics at the Los Ventana Canyon Resort Hotel in Tucson, Arizona, April 26th to the 28th. Certainly hope many people can come and attend this conference. And our website for more information on it is www.medicalcannabis.com. And when we left off just a little bit ago, Dr. Abrams was just bringing up the topic or the subject of CBD, cannabidiol, which is a very important point. I think the government keeps trying to tell people, well, you've got a marijuana pill, and the Marinol, dronabinol that's out there, synthetic THC, is clearly not all the magic of cannabis. Donald, could you go more a little bit about what we know about CBD?
Right. So THC and CBD are members of the chemical compound class called cannabinoids, which are the main active ingredients in the plant. THC, delta-9 THC, dronabinol, which is licensed and available as a treatment for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting and loss of appetite in AIDS wasting, is just one of those cannabinoids. The plant has all the cannabinoids plus other chemical compounds, the terpenoids and the flavonoids, which are felt to enhance the beneficial effects of the beneficial things and also tone down the sort of adverse effects of things that might have, adverse effects. So it's basically much more balanced than if you take out the single most active psychoactive component and put it in a pill and have people swallow that. So CBD, we now know, is very potent pain reliever and anti-inflammatory. And there is some suggestion that CBD as well as THC may have some anti-cancer activity in and of themselves as well. The interesting thing about CBD is that it's not psychoactive. So people who are accessing strains of cannabis at the dispensaries here, for example, in San Francisco, where they label each available product as to the percentage of THC and CBD are finding that they get pain relief and anti-inflammatory activity without the high that is so known in high THC blends. So, many of my cancer patients are telling me how they benefit from high CBD cannabis, for example, for sleeping, where they don't necessarily want to have a strong psychoactive effect right before they go to sleep. I think that, as the years move on, in response to Al's question, CBD might ultimately be developed as a pharmaceutical as well. However, it is Schedule 1 because it comes from that plant that we heard the beautiful song about. And I did want to comment on that song. I hadn't heard that song. It reminded me of, I went to Brown in the 60s and, Arlo Guthrie and all those people singing songs and, about people being able to grow their own medicine. As a cancer doctor, I always say that every day I see patients who suffer from loss of appetite, nausea, depression, anxiety, insomnia, and pain. And I could write a prescription for 6 different medicines, or I could recommend that they just try cannabis. And cannabis is a medicine that patients can grow themselves. I ask my cancer patients, what brings you joy? And the number who respond that gardening brings them joy, I think, is not a coincidence. I think if part of you feel has died, or you yourself are dying, the ability to bring life out of the ground is very powerful. And so if people can grow their own medicine instead of taking 6 different prescription drugs, that's incredibly empowering for the cancer patient, or I presume for any patient.
Absolutely, and I thought it was great that the artist was nice enough to send that tune in for me to play on the air, because like you, I know that there are so many people who could take care of their own problems if they just grew their own plants in their backyard. When I was in Muncie, Indiana, I encountered a lady who was about 68 years old. She had she was having eye problems, and I told her that I believe that smoking marijuana would take care of her medical problem with her eyes, and she said she knew it. She knew that would be true, but it was illegal. And I said, so you would rather go blind and lose your vision forever than break the law? She said, well, that's how it is. It's illegal. Now, totally blows my mind that somebody would actually make the decision to lose their eyesight, or to because of glaucoma, or keep on throwing up because they're going through chemotherapy because the plant's illegal and they just refuse to use it on that account. How often do you come up against that? I mean, not in California, but I mean, there's...
Yeah, certainly not in California. So that's a... but I've heard those stories, and I get emails from people, all over the country who, want to know what they can do in their state, which is, practicing prohibition. I think
what do you tell them as a doctor? I'm bipolar, and I was at the time was in Indiana, and my doctor said to me, I cannot legally prescribe to you marijuana, but I can certainly tell you that if you were living somewhere where you can legally get marijuana, it would be the thing I would prescribe and highly recommend to you. Now, do you want to take something out of the chemistry set, or do you want to go talk to your friends in the black market?
Yeah, we cannot actually prescribe marijuana in California either. We can recommend it. We give patients a letter, and they take that to a dispensary. The dispensary calls to make sure that the physician wrote the letter, and then they can dispense the cannabis. But I can't prescribe it because there's no pharmacy, if you will. There are dispensaries that are sort of like pharmacies, but, again, the physicians are in a funny position in California because not all of them really know that much about cannabis as medicine. We actually recently, I was on a committee of the California Medical Association Technical Advisory Committee that was called Legalization and Taxation, because the California Medical Association believes the best next step would be to legalize and tax cannabis. And it was adopted by the full membership of the California Medical Association at their meeting in December of 2011. And the request was made to move this forward to the American Medical Association to make it a national priority.
Dr. Abrams, we've known each other for a long time, and I'm going to ask you a tough question. I've come to the conclusion that legislative bodies in America that seem to feel enough hubris in them to make decisions on people's health and are generally, not always, but generally made up of law enforcement people, maybe some ex-military, and certainly a whole gaggle of lawyers. Very few of our legislators at any level of government are nurses, physicians like yourself, or other healthcare professionals. What is your feeling? You spent years in schools to learn the art of medicine. I know you're an esteemed graduate of Brown University. How do you feel when doctors are given second place to lawyers and cops about making medical marijuana decisions for patients? And isn't that practicing medicine without a license?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's not such a hard question. I mean, what you say is absolutely true. Actually, I went to Brown undergrad and Stanford for medical school, so I think I've got a pretty good pedigree as a physician, and I know probably a heck of a lot more about cannabis than, people in legislative bodies. But unfortunately, there are some physicians, as you know, that are in Congress or the Senate, but very, very few, and certainly their voices are probably not so loud on this issue. As you know, and I think that this is bigger than our government. There's probably United Nations treaties that continue to maintain prohibition against cannabis throughout most of the world. I mean, Canada and Portugal, I guess, are countries that don't have that prohibition. And interestingly, yeah.
I don't know. My understanding, Donald, is that now there's upwards of almost 24 countries around the world, including Canada and Spain and Portugal, that have allowed the use of Sativex. Now that's
well, just hold that thought right there, because we're going to pay our bills. And we can come back and discuss that. And I also know that the government seems to be on the verge of introducing some new marijuana drugs, or at least there are some pharmaceuticals that are going to be introducing some new marijuana-related drugs here soon. Makes me wonder that might be why everybody in the government thinks it is not time for hemp.
Medical clinics are the premier physicians clinic in the United States. THCF has offices all across the United States from Hawaii to Michigan. THCF Medical Clinics has helped approximately 150,000 patients obtain their medical marijuana permits to legally possess, grow, and use medical marijuana. If you have chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, or any other neurological degenerative disease, or if you have any gastrointestinal disorders such as GERD, irritable bowel syndrome, or if you have AIDS, cancer, spastic disorders, seizure disorders, or glaucoma, call us at 1-800-723-0188 or visit us online at hemp.org. Again, the number is 1-800-723-0188, and the site is hemp.org.
You're listening to the future of talk. American Freedom Radio. This is American Freedom Radio.
3 generations of hemp, cannabis, marijuana prohibition greatly contribute to planetary deforestation, pollution, and ozone destruction. Let hemp compete in construction, paper, fiber, fuel, nutritional, and pharmaceutical corporations. Cannabis has been safe, efficient medicine for many illnesses throughout all generations and for natural relaxation. Still, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars and throw away our Constitution to continue this insane persecution.
looking for their medicine. They, their friends, relatives, and physicians constitute a large segment of the 11 million otherwise law-abiding citizens with criminal records due to this prohibition.
Excuse me for a moment while I vent about the mind-boggling stupidity of the autocratic, bureaucratic, right-wing, Neanderthal numbskulls who keep pushing an insane, inane, and inhumane holy war against marijuana, which is, after all, a weed. The most embarrassing thing for these holy warriors is that the weed is winning. They've been at this war since 1937, spending billions and billions of our tax dollars, militarizing our borders, and stomping on our Bill of Rights. They've used phone taps, garbage searches, jackbooted raids, and draconian prison terms to do what? To nab peaceful, mellow tokers who aren't bothering anyone, that's what. Despite 60 years of spending our money, they failed. 85% of Americans say marijuana is easy to obtain today. A third of our population says they've tried it. Nearly 15 million people partake of it at least monthly, and more high school students now smoke marijuana than cigarettes. Meanwhile, the holy warriors have become more fanatical and thuggish. A marijuana arrest is made every 41 seconds in America, 9 out of 10 of them for mere possession. In 2004, 772,000 Americans were arrested on marijuana charges, more than for all violent crimes combined. And 40,000 Americans are in prison today for this victimless crime, more than the entire prison populations of 8 European countries. Even sicker, the sanctimonious weed warriors have made it a crime for thousands of seriously sick people to get the medical benefits of using small amounts of doctor-prescribed marijuana. Weirdly, our doctors can prescribe cocaine for patients, but not marijuana. This is Jim Hightower saying, for information and action to stop this absurd war, call the Marijuana Policy Project, 202-462-5747.
Well, if you had a bowl, good spring reefer, a big fat Joe beef, much sweeter, mighty don't hide it. Mighty don't hide it. Mighty don't hide it. Mighty don't hide it. Well, mighty don't hide it. Fire up right now.
Out of the closet and let everybody know that you are a marijuana user. And I also want to say thank you to AmericanFreedomRadio.com for raising the voice of not just the freedom fighters in America, but for raising the voice of the members of the marijuana movement. I am so frustrated, Mary Lynn and Al and Dr. Abrams. We have a government who says there's no medical benefits to marijuana, yet these same clowns that say this silly nonsense drive by medical marijuana dispensaries right there in Washington, D.C., And there are 17 states who have said, nope, there is medical marijuana, and there are benefits to it. And look, we can even do a program and make it work and function and even get taxes out of it and raise revenues. And we've got members of the federal government who give right now, I think, still 4 people in this country medical marijuana cigarettes every month. But yet they continue to say marijuana has no medical benefits. How can these people continue to look into the camera and say those silly lies?
Some people just have no pride, I guess. But before we get back to this, I'd like to make a comment about your advertisement run by your radio station about George Washington and Valley Forge. Those soldiers were in hemp clothing, by the way,
right?
All of them. And a second comment is that George Washington and those soldiers suffered through that Revolutionary War year in the state of Pennsylvania, which now, because of Pennsylvania's governor and Pennsylvania's legislators doing nothing positive for medical cannabis patients, are effectively denying the soldiers that return to the state of Pennsylvania with war wounds from using cannabis and being able to be treated in Veterans Administration hospitals. So,
and let's not forget that George Washington also grew marijuana on his farm specifically for smoking, because it even says in his diary how he separated the male plants from the female plants.
That's correct. Well, back to Donald Abrams in Maryland.
I just wanted to also note this conference that we're having in 2012, another speaker we're going to have is Dr. Andrew Weil, who started the Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine. As Donald said, he started out at Brown undergrad, Stanford for medicine, and he also took this integrative medicine course, which I think I really like it. The Center for Integrative Medicine being affiliated with the University of Arizona. But the idea of integrative medicine, to me, brings it closer to nursing, I guess you could say, because there is so much more emphasis on nutrition and other things other than just the let's give them a pill kind of Western medicine, and that's a close exaggeration. But Donald, could you speak a little bit more in terms of the topic that you are going to be addressing, the use for cancer patients? You talked a little bit of it, but I think that is a remarkable thing in terms of the patients, that there might be several reasons you're going to be recommending it for patients.
Right, yeah. Again, I mentioned the symptoms, nausea, loss of appetite, nausea from chemotherapy. You know, we have many, many powerful agents now to suppress vomiting for patients getting chemotherapy, but for some patients, they don't work. I believe it was Melissa Etheridge who came out and said that the only way she was able to complete her adjuvant chemotherapy for her breast cancer was by using cannabis. And I think if it works for some patients, then it needs to be available. I mentioned insomnia. I told you how my patients are getting better sleep with various strains of cannabis. Pain, if they're taking an opiate or if they're not taking an opiate. Depression, you know, what's the matter with a little euphoria sometimes? Where my partner Clint Werner wrote the book Marijuana Gateway to Health, and he talks about euphorophobia or something, how this country is so puritanical in our, you know, desire not to be happy sometimes. So I think the most interesting thing, and again, this is highlighted in Clint's book, Marijuana Gateway to Health, is that there is increasing evidence that cannabis in and of itself, or some of the constituents, be it THC or CBD, may have some anti-cancer activity. Now, I am not a believer in the cannabis oils that people are touting as curing cancer, because as an oncologist for 30 years, our definition of cure means 5 years of survival without evidence of the cancer. And I don't think that these cannabis oil cures have been around for that long. And as I sort of hinted with the discussion about HIV, I think cure is a strong word and, you know, shouldn't be thrown around lightly. And I get very depressed when I see these patients coming to me who have denied themselves of potentially curative conventional cancer therapies in favor of treating their cancer with this cannabis oil, to the point where by now the cancer is spread and they can't be cured or even effectively treated. However, I do think that, that there is some potential for more research in, how these cannabis constituents do affect cancer cells, both in the test tube, in animals, and in people. Because I think interestingly, it was first alluded to or discovered at the National Cancer Institute in the U.S. in 1974, the first article about cannabis having a potential anti-cancer effect. But since that time, that research has left the country and is mainly being done in Spain and Italy. So I'll be talking about that a little bit at the meeting.
Yeah, excellent. And speaking of Spain and Italy, we do have Vincenzo Di Marzo coming from Italy, PhD cannabinoid researcher, and Cristina Sanchez, PhD, coming from Spain to talk about the research they're doing. I think one of the other things that I found really interesting with these states, New Jersey, when they finally got their law passed, the only way they could do it was to make sure that chronic pain was not one of the indications that would be acceptable for a physician to write a recommendation. And right now in Hawaii, there's debates going on to remove chronic pain from one of the lists of doing it. And you might want to comment on that as a doctor, because from a nurse, I'm thinking, what can be more serious than living with chronic pain?
Wow, and the Institute of Medicine just published their report that $650 billion are spent in the U.S. each year on chronic pain, and that includes the cost of workforce loss. And cannabis, I see so many patients who totally get off their opioids and manage their chronic pain with cannabis that, that doesn't make any sense at all to me. But, again, as I often say, I don't think science drives the train here in this discussion.
Yeah, that's frustrating. I'm still kind of frustrated. I know things can, in many ways, maybe be beyond President Obama's control, but when he first came into office and said he wanted his policies based on science and not ideology, I was, in the background just cheering away, going, yes, it's about time we do something like that.
I think we all are disappointed in that respect.
Yeah.
I just want to, I know we're probably going to end soon, but I know that Al and Mary Lynn are friends with Raphael Mechoulam, who is the father of cannabis chemistry. He's at the Institute for Drug Research at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, now has celebrated his 80th birthday, and he wrote an editorial in this month's Mayo Clinic Proceedings where they have two articles about controversies in medical and recreational uses of marijuana. And Rafi wrote the editorial, and here's the last two sentences or three sentences of the editorial. He says, "Nevertheless, I believe that medical marijuana as a therapeutic entity is here to stay. It is being used in numerous medical conditions, at times with considerable success. Are we entitled to neglect a valuable drug? ? And that's the end of it. It's so sort of a nice Israeli ending with that question.
And that's a great way to end the show. We're down to about 40 seconds. Dr. Abrams, you want to give a shout-out to a website that people can find you or your information at?
No, I don't even have one, I don't think. Maybe at the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine or marijuanagatewaytohealth.com.
And we look forward to having you back on the program soon as a guest. And Mary Lynn and Al, you want to give people a shout-out for your website?
Sure. Thank you again, Donald, for coming. We much appreciate it. And, folks, you can get all the information and more from medicalcannabis.com.
And I would encourage you to let your friends know that we have a series going on each day of the week. Tomorrow, KDK distributor Kelly Kristen will be on the program as we talk about the accessories that supply the marijuana movement with all of its needs. So please make it a point to let all your friends know that it really is important to tune in and listen, and tell all of our sponsors that you heard about them here on Time for Hemp.
Take another look and spend some time for him. Don't cut trees for paper, 'cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yes, it's time for him. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 bales of oil. No need for pesticides
Yeah.